homeschool.
We live in St. Genevieve, it's just an hour away, we can easily get together.
She's living with us now in Virginia, but they're there for, her husband's in the Sim for a summer class, he's with a dissertation. But yeah, so I'll have to.
Yeah, I'd love Joanna, I met her last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry.
to-
No. That's, we have a great opportunity to be informal here and make some connections. And home educators have really, I'm impressed, having now recently entered into this new field for me. I'm so impressed in how well they interact, communicate, and discuss ideas. Much better than I was used to as a, quote, professional Lutheran educator, where we didn't really swap ideas a whole lot. But anyway, so I suppose the V's are here, especially because Joanna is considering some things. Joanna and Adam. Joanna, her husband's name is Adam.
Yes.
Okay, I forget. And the boy's name, the little boy's name.
Sam.
Sam.
He
That's right.
has delayed speech development, and so the schools automatically, say, okay, special ed.
Yeah, and they're already trying to get it in the preschool. So,
But we know, like you say, that ends to. I was waiting to hear how you were going to describe it when you said that leads to, and I thought, okay, dead ends.
Well, the other thing, my husband's an attorney, and he read the paperwork with it. Once they're in, you have to go through a lot to get them out.
Yes, you do.
The burden of proof is on you to say, well, again, this isn't at all the topic, but he said, no, don't even do that. And you can get services privately. We'll talk later.
Yeah.
We've always gotten speech, PT, OT, but we've always done it privately through Cardinal Glennon or the hospital or whatever, and insurance covers it. So you don't have to get involved, and you shouldn't, in my opinion, get involved with the government programs.
Well, our topic for today is catechesis and home education or something like that. And so I suppose the idea is to put the two together, but we can talk about one somewhat separate from the other. But I think that all that we're talking about, whether you be in a classroom, formal institutional classroom, or whether you are at home sitting at the kitchen table, whatever we're doing, it's all about catechesis. So we can, at least in Lutheran education, the two go hand in hand. A little bit about me. You've heard a little bit about my what I said earlier, but my background is, first of all, went to school, got a degree in secondary ed, and had the goal of teaching in a Lutheran high school. And student taught in Lutheran high school in Michigan, Westland Lutheran High School. I'm not familiar with that school. Student taught there. My first love, math and mathematics and science. So I was trained math and science teacher, and was blessed to try to get certification in the state of Michigan. You have to go to subject area, take subject area exams. And so tried to get all of them, as many in general science, biology, and physics, and so forth. So I did. I wanted to teach as many science courses as I could, and also mathematics was one big section, and did that. After having done all that, I never taught in high school until I became a homeschool parent. Now I teach high school with my son. So it took a while, but now I teach those courses to my son.
Just out of curiosity, how did you get to be the principal of Plano without ever teaching?
Well, I eventually made it to Plano, but that was after a few years in a couple other places, and where I was in elementary.
Oh, you taught elementary.
I taught elementary, junior high,
Yeah.
math, science, and because I couldn't at the time stand teaching history or English, now I just, like this, but in my younger days, didn't want anything to do with it. I always swapped with other teachers. Say, okay, I'll teach your math and science, you'll teach mine. And that was probably a good thing at the time. Why have someone who doesn't know a whole lot about right? Because I wasn't educated. I think I shared earlier that I never heard about classical education or anything about, and I never heard any history of education prior to late 1800s, early 1900s. All history of education courses started in 1900, which I'm doing. And outside of him, there was no history of education. How many of you have been through the any sort of teacher training session and can testify to that? So history begins 100 years ago. Isn't that frightful? So then when I went to get my master's degree, I think I shared that even then, all the educational theorists were all from the 1900s, or we may have talked about people like B.F. Skinner or this kind of thing, but we never ever discussed anything beyond 100 to 200 years. And I didn't know any differently and didn't really think about it. Because never ever really asked the question, well, what happened before then? Except for that I knew that in Lutheran circles we had a little bit more of an educational history there, because we had schools since our foundation here in the Missouri Synod. And I always found it interesting that the Missouri Synod was actually founded on 14 schools and 12 congregations. So there were more schools in the original founding of the Missouri Synod than there were congregations. So when I went to Faith Plano, I'd already been influenced by a single heart interview that I've already mentioned on issues, etc. And the reason I went to Faith Plano is because Pastor Hill, John Hill's father, was the pastor there, and I married a daughter of the congregation, Noelia Rump. And so he knew of me, Pastor Hill did, and he wanted to influence the school with a classical education paradigm, and so I happened to be the person that he thought would do the job. And I came in with instructions that even though you may not know much about this, this is going to be a classical school, and we want you to help make that happen. So that's kind of how it all started. Fast forward just a little bit, we currently have, blessed, 7 children, and they've all, until recently, been through Lutheran schools. And I use that in the generic sense because, in other words, they bore the name Lutheran in their name. Not all of them were Lutheran. Some of them were varying degrees. And I think that if we put an emphasis on that a Lutheran school is a school that has Lutheran teachers, I think that's really the best way to talk about a Lutheran school. I think a Lutheran homeschool is a homeschool where the teachers are Lutheran. Because there's a lot of different ways to define what is Lutheran or even what is Christian, right? For instance, if you go to a Christian school, these generic Christian schools, you walk in, and I was known to do this quite often, called researching the competition. But in Plano, where there's all kinds of schools, you just walk in as a visitor. Hi, I'd like to check out your school. Oh, great. The secretary gets a notion, the principal gets a notion, and they give you the grand tour. And you ask them, what's Christian about your school? If someone were to ask you about your home education and what's Lutheran about your school, what would you say? Well, my children have a Lutheran teacher. Or would you say, I don't know. Oftentimes when I would go visit, I would go to the Catholic boys' school and the Catholic girls' school in Dallas. Okay? And go to they have the big annual, try to invite everyone there, an open house for enrollment. Prestigious schools. And, just ask questions. If they're a Catholic school, if they're in a science class, I can remember being in a science classroom, we were getting a tour of this Jesuit boys' school in Dallas, and I asked, we had to talk to the science teacher. I asked the science teacher, this is a Catholic school, right? Yes? I said, well, what makes your science class Catholic? And she said, well, it's a Catholic school, but science is just a subject that we teach there in this school. I said, so is your science class Catholic, or is it Christian, or is it? Well, it's really none of that, she said. It's a science class. So I said, this is the basic thing then. What about when it comes to teaching about the beginning of time? How do you teach about that? Well, we teach, she said, according to the standard understanding of how time began. I said, oh, really? Well, what is that standard understanding of how time began? Well, this is the textbook that we use. And chapter 1 talks about evolution. And so that's what we teach here. Oh, okay. Went to another Catholic school, and I don't mean to pick on Catholic school, they pick on other schools too. Went to Catholic school in Storm Lake, Iowa, and I went in and I talked to Mrs. Mock, principal, and I said, what do you teach, how do you teach the Catholic faith in science class? And Mrs. Mock said, well, we don't teach the Catholic faith during science class. I said, well, when do you teach the Catholic faith? Well, we don't really teach the Catholic faith, she says. We kind of do, we kind of don't. Because see, everyone wants to be, for marketing purposes, everyone wants to be generic. So that when we talk about our school, we say something like, we offer a Christian education. Christian education. Well, what is a Christian education? Or we offer a Catholic education. Well, what is a Catholic education? So, quite often, it comes down to either whatever the teacher's teaching is whatever is kind of the worldview there, religion being taught there, or it's the textbook. You go into a lot of non-denominational schools, and I'm just using Plano and Dallas as an area because I think there is fairly good representation of what might be going on in the world in a big city like that. To go visit one of the schools down the road that started a high school, and we were thinking about starting a high school, but because they were only about 2 miles down the road, we thought there might be some competition. Which, unfortunately, you have to consider when you're going to sink a bunch of money into, is this school going to pull a bunch of kids away from your school, or possible kids? So I went to visit them, and I said, asked them some of the same questions about what you teach here and how is this Christian? Well, they use the ABECA curriculum, see? And because they use the ABECA curriculum, they're a Christian school. Interestingly, I vicared in Fort Worth, Texas, and because I had a school administrator certificate degree in Texas, they asked me to sort of administrate the school for the year. I said, you sure you really want me to do that? And, well, yeah, we do. So, well, none of the teachers were Lutheran, first of all, so that was kind of a problem, wasn't it? So at the first staff meeting, I said, well, how do you teach the Christian faith? And the pastor was there, and he was what we might consider a conservative, confessional or at least he would like to consider himself by those kinds of words, titles. Well, he piped up right away. We use the Faith Alive series from Concordia Publishing House. So, I said, well, what happens then? There was a Methodist teacher. I said, does the Faith Alive series teach anything about baptism or the Lord's Supper? Oh, yes, it does. Well, do you teach that? Yes, she said. Well, how do you teach that? Because doesn't that conflict with what you believe? Could you do that? Could you teach someone to pray to Mary, for instance, if you just happen to get hired at a Catholic school, and because you were hired there and as part of the job description, So, so then they said, well, Vicar, started pointing some of these things out. Well, Vicar, why don't you come and teach it? And I said, well, all right. And I had a plan that we were going to try for that year. And we decided to have an opening every day. Every day we were going to gather. We were going to have an opening. And in that opening, we were going to recite and discuss the catechism and sing a hymn. That's what we were going to do every day. Every day we were going to do this. And I said, is that okay? It's the catechism. It's Luther's small catechism. This is a Lutheran school. Is that okay? We'll learn a Lutheran hymn, and we'll get together, and every day I will give just a little short on the catechism. Sure, we'll do that. So we read it, and I had it printed out, and we did the recitation method, the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. What does this mean? We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. Okay, now you say that. Is this echoing catechesis, echoing, the echo. Catechesis is stems from this word that includes the word echo, right? Kata, echo. And so this was the method of teaching faith, by echoing. So this is what we did. And most of our students were not Lutheran. Thanks be to God that after teaching all the way through at the end of the year, the children, having learned what the Bible says about baptism, some of them had never been taught about baptism. They didn't. Baptists don't really talk a lot about baptism, except it's something that you got to do. And it means that baptism for them means that you go up into a dunk tank and you get wet. It's the action that everybody. That's how they understand what baptism is. But they don't understand what the Bible has to say about baptism at all. So then to teach them about baptism, here's what happens in baptism. This is what God promises to you and gives to you in baptism. Isn't that fantastic? Can you imagine that God wishes to give you all these blessings in such a simple little thing? So that children went home and said to their parents, I want to be baptized. In one case, we had a little guy who was in 3rd grade, went home, asked his mom to be baptized. Well, he had an older sister that hadn't been baptized and a younger brother that hadn't been baptized. And some catechesis there, they also came and were baptized in the school. There's a lot of unsuccessful stories that I can tell, but that was a successful story. So, catechesis, how is it in our homeschool education, how is it that we accomplish this? And what do we consider catechesis? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I suppose if I were to ask you, what are some things, if I were to ask you questions like I've already asked, what is Lutheran about your home education or home education experience? What is Lutheran about? What is Christian about? Are there parts of it that maybe are or aren't considered Lutheran? And to think about those kinds of things in the way that we approach what we do at home. And having said that, I'd like to go back and maybe fill in just some general grammar, maybe about the small catechism in general and some understandings of catechesis from Luther's perspective. And some things some points of interest. In Luther's day in Germany, for instance, come across different statistics here, but you kind of get the idea that even after the printing of Luther's Small Catechism, okay, even after it came out, it's been estimated that only about 5% of people in the empire could actually read it. Only about 5%. Now some will say 10%. Let's say even say 20%. I don't care. Pick one of those numbers. It's low. There weren't a lot of people able to read what Luther had written. And even after much of the educational reforms that Luther and Melanchthon had worked to implement, which, when you consider, Luther and Melanchthon, by the time they'd been through their own Reformation, transformation, so to speak, and started implementing some of the ideas by which God had blessed it to see via the Scriptures and some of the reforms that were being carried about. It's hard to pick a certain amount of time, but even after some time, the literacy rate had risen to about 30%, some have estimated. So obviously, some of the education reforms did have a very strong impact in Germany. But when it came to the Scriptures and being able to read the Bible or a little handbook, such as the Catechism, still not many were able to read it. So the process became, and this became the Kata Echo, very practical way of teaching the faith, that was to use this echoing method. And oftentimes it began with the pastor, because the pastor could read. For other reasons too, but especially because the very practical reason, he could read. So here he had Luther's Catechism. He could open the Catechism, and to mom and dad who may not, 80% of whom couldn't read the Catechism, they learned it this way. Pastor says it, mom and dad and children often would say it back. We can't get together with the pastor every day, so now we're going to go home, and in the morning time and in the evening time, we're going to repeat what pastor said. And so there was this echoing that just echoed throughout the cities as people would be learning the Christian faith, the very basics, the grammar, we might say, of the Christian faith.
Our oldest son, when he started taking catechism, he recorded all the questions and the answers, and then he played them, and that's how he learned it. So, of course, we didn't know that meant echoing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's so interesting. It really did help him, and then the others followed suit and did that as well, as so that they used a tape recorder and
yes, I already jumping ahead and commenting here. I really truly think that that this echoing idea really we need to bring that back. Well, I have been through. I'm a truly a product of Lutheran education. Beginning from my very first formal education, I attended a Lutheran day school. The only years I did not attend a Lutheran school were 4 years in public high school. But an undergrad and 2 master's degrees later, all been in Lutheran education. Okay, so I'm, for better or for worse, product of Lutheran education. When I went through Lutheran elementary school, we didn't have to learn the catechism, okay? It was required. You know that in many Lutheran schools today, it's not required to know the catechism. Schools that I've been associated with and called to work with, I walk into that school and, no one has a catechism. You don't get a catechism until you get to 7th grade. There is something wrong with that. So the catechism, the echoing, can a 3-year-old repeat back to you something you tell them? Why do we have to wait till 7th grade to hand them the catechism? We can orally hand them the catechism. We recite, this is how, kind of getting ahead of my little thing here, but this is informal enough that we can mix things up. We all sit around the table at dinner time, at breakfast time, twice a day, and we do 2 things. Well, 3. It's our prayer time. And one of the other things I think to emphasize here is praying the catechism as opposed to making simply a matter of an academic exercise. To pray the catechism. And so we say the now that everyone in our family kind of, once your kids get old enough, they know that they know it. So it's not like you have to do a lot of echoing now. But what happens is we have a 3-month-old, we have a 3-year-old, we have a 6-year-old. Well, guess what? My 3-year-old, hearing us, we go through the catechism throughout the year, and we start over at the beginning of the next year. And guess what she's doing? She knows these things. My kids we still have the old, in our congregation, getting away from this too, but the questioning is an opportunity to confess the faith. And when kids are asked to recite parts, my 6-year-old or my 9-year-old, nowhere near the acceptable age of the Missouri Synod to be confirmed, are back there reciting it with the kids. The thing that frustrates me, I suppose, about that sometimes is, well, that's the pastor's kids. That's the pastor's kids. But we were doing those kinds of things when I was a school teacher too. And I have friends who aren't you're my friends, aren't you? And I would hope that some of you have already thought about these kind of things and are doing some of those very sorts of things in your own home. It's really that easy. But getting back to where I was going with my own education, the way I was kind of taught the Christian faith was this was your assignment, it was written on the board. Sometimes you had a workbook page that you had to do on it. I'm not criticizing those things, I'm just kind of saying that was the way it was done. You would go home and you'd come back the next day and you were to recite what you'd gone home, and you had to learn it on your own. So the responsibility to learn it, to memorize it, was your own, basically. And parents, of course, your parent was supposed to hold you responsible for that. But I tell you, and this is true, I also teach Latin this way to my children. To learn it together through echoing, or what was called recitation, is so much easier. And it's fun that way. It wasn't any fun, really, when I was a kid growing up. I did it, and I thank God I know the catechism today, and I knew it before because I did it this way, but it wasn't a whole lot of fun to go home. Teacher says I have to know the first through the third commandments and their meanings. Okay, and I'm sitting in my room by myself, going over and over and over. If my teacher would have done this, if my teacher would have said, okay, we're going to learn the 10 Commandments. And we're going to do it because we're going to recite them together. And we're going to say the meanings together. And we just keep doing it until I know it. we would all know it. All of us would know it. Even the slower ones, the faster ones, maybe the faster ones would get bored, I don't know. But, and then you can use little games like that with that too. Okay, all the boys, all the girls. I found that now as a pastor, my kids will not. I have a memory book at our congregation. Okay, and I didn't bring it along. I forgot to bring it along, but here's the way I do. I've written the memory book, and I'll kind of show you. Each day, each week, there's an assignment that covers for 26 weeks. So some of you, do you remember the old green memory gems?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, kind of adopted from that, but each page it's a little booklet here, so I'll make a little page. All right, each page has a due by, and it is the next Wednesday, because we always meet on Wednesday, and then I'll have the text of the catechism written out. First commandment, okay, and then the second commandment, third commandment. Well, these are all with their meanings, okay? And it says due by. Then at the bottom of the page, I have a little chart. Okay? And this little chart has an AM and a PM. And then it's divided into 7 days. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it's Wednesday, so we always start on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, start back over Wednesday. And this page over here also has the same chart, AM, PM, and so forth. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But this over here may say the fourth commandment, fifth, and sixth commandment, let's say, with their meanings. And it's all written out. The complete text is written out, okay, with the due by. Well, my goal, and I haven't quite gotten this done, but some of my families are starting to do it. I've been there 4 years, and change doesn't happen overnight. But what they do is then, the goal is every morning, that's what the AM is there for, they are to go with their families, at breakfast time, they are to say that together. Once. Maybe twice if you think you want to go over it. And then the same thing in the evening. So you will set it 14 times at home, echoing with your family, reciting it. We had in our parish very few kids that knew the 10 Commandments when I showed up. Apostles. They knew the Apostles' Creed because they say that in church. They knew the Lord's Prayer because you pray that in church, but they didn't know the 10 Commandments, they didn't know the meanings, this kind of thing. Finally, I think they're starting to get it. And the families that are participating, not all of them do, families are participating, they're saying, this is really so easy. You just say it together. Echo it back and forth, catechesis. So, this very simple method of just what I would call the grammar, the very basics of catechesis, reciting back and forth. Today, as in the Luther's day, we really have, it's kind of an interesting time when it comes to the Christian faith. What time are we supposed to be done?
11:15.
Okay, 11:15. I want to read to you briefly here, going back and forth, Luther and today. Listen to what Luther had to say in his preface to Small Catechism, which unfortunately in today's catechism is placed at the back end of the catechism as if it's unimportant. But I think that it is important for us to consider today. Luther writes, in his preface to Small Catechism, he says, "The deplorable, miserable conditions which I have observed," and this was from the visitation of congregations in Saxony, it was 1528. "The deplorable, miserable conditions which I have observed when visiting the parishes have constrained and pressed me to put this catechism of Christian doctrine into this brief, plain and simple form. How pitiable, so help me God, were the things that I saw. This is what Luther was so upset about. The common man, especially in the villages, knows practically nothing of Christian doctrine, and many of the pastors are almost entirely incompetent to teach. Yet all the people are supposed to be Christians, have been baptized, and received the Holy Sacrament, even though they do not know the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, or the Ten Commandments, and live like poor animals of the barnyard and pig pen. What these people have mastered, however, is the fine art of tearing all Christian liberty to shreds. And it goes on. It's hard to be one who analyzes culture when you are part of that culture. But today, I think we still might be able to say with Luther there are some deplorable, miserable conditions. But it may play itself out in some different ways. One of the things that I have found as a teacher and pastor in the church is that it seems as though there are a lot of people interested in spiritual things. There really are. But while they are interested, at the same time there seems to be a rejection of the basic biblical faith. They are not all, they're not finding Christianity there. Even in our little rural congregation, people who have now been confirmed in the Christian faith and are 15, 20, 25, or 20, 25 years old, some of the conversations I was talking to a guy, went to some community college, dropped out, but he has aspirations to have a PhD in history. Well, I asked him, well, why did he want to have a PhD in history? Well, he wanted to teach people. Well, what is it that you want him to teach? You know, what is so exciting that you want to teach them? The truth about history. You know, this is a guy that I haven't seen this. I've seen him in church maybe 4 or 5 times in 4 years. He wants to teach the truth about history. But you know, when pastors go to graduation parties and wedding events, that's when you get to meet all the unchurched people. They won't come to you, but you can find them there at the parties. So you got to go and engage in a conversation. Really, Matt? Well, what do you find so interesting? Well, he's found that he's been reading. You know, I haven't been a church pastor, but I've been reading a lot about the Bible. About the Bible. You've been reading the Bible? Well, not necessarily so much the Bible, but about the Bible. Oh, okay. Well, you know, he has gotten all caught up in this really what modern day form of called Gnosticism, sort of the Dan Brown garbage. And he knows all about the Bible now. He knows the truth. It's as if every person who's spiritual now knows that conspiracy theories behind the Bible. He was sort of proud of his newfound Christianity. I think he even felt as though he was more of a Christian now than he was when he was confirmed, because when he was confirmed, he had to memorize all these things, but now he was really grasping spiritual things and was really empowered to think deeply about things of the Bible. And so, you know, you're listening to me, and I can see your expression upon which I'm also thinking, how sad. Catechesis, of course, you hopefully know this. Hopefully I'm speaking to the choir here, but this of course, is an ongoing thing. one of the, maybe some of you have heard, what's his name, Dan Preuss. Pastor Preuss, have you ever heard his spiel on how my father taught me the catechism or something like that? How my father taught me the Christian faith? Okay, you can get it on, you can find it, the whole audio online. Very interesting, because you know who Dan Preuss's father was. The Reverend Dr. Robert Preuss, of recent fame, but also sainted. And so it's very interesting to hear that how, even though Daniel and Clement and all of them, Rolf, and all of them attended regular school, or they attended Lutheran schools, but so forth and so on, about how his father taught him the Christian faith, and it was an everyday kind of, just as it came up.
Why I Am a Lutheran. Did you write that?
He did write the book Why I Am a Lutheran. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I had that book. I read
Okay.
it, yes.
He has, in addition to that, sort of a popular presentation that he's given on how my father taught me the Christian faith. Okay. Which I would really encourage you to read that. Or listen to that, find that. Just Google search it, I think you'll find it. But one of the things I have thought about myself, my own, as the scriptures say in the Gospel of John, that the Holy Spirit being the schoolmaster. And yet how he uses us, parents, pastors. For my own upbringing, thinking about how Dan's father was very much involved, and Pastor Preuss, very involved. And he would be things that you and I might consider not even nice. I remember him telling a story that they were driving by, and they had a bunch of kids, and they're going down the road in a big boat car, and they would drive past a Roman Catholic church, and Dr. Preuss would say, "There's the Church of the Antichrist." All the kids were like, so these little things that as this. But then the other thing that really Dan focused on is around the table. Okay, and I think this is where Christian Lutheran homeschool educators meet around the table. And I cannot stress this enough, that the role of parents, whether home educators or not, catechesis, but most especially the role of the father. Dad, this is difficult, I know. This day and age is not popular to say that, even among Lutherans at times. And sometimes it's difficult because Dad's not there. But we need to do whatever we can to get Dad there. And as often as Dad can, to be there as the one being echoed. The family needs to see, especially Dad, taking on that responsibility of making sure that the kata echoing is going on. And I'm here to say that if that's not that the Holy Spirit cannot work through a feminine voice and this kind of thing. We get into all these kinds of fussing when we talk about women pastors too. Well, can the Holy Spirit work if a woman speaks the word of God? Okay, there's all these kinds of little things going on. I don't want to go down there, but Luther understood this too. As the head of the household, should teach his family in a simple way. In a simple way. And my wife helps out too, don't get me wrong. And if I'm not there, my wife's doing that, although I've been trying to find ways to maybe encourage my 16-year-old son to also want to take down that role. When Dad's got to be gone, I always say to him, "Son, I'm leaving. You've got to be a leader while I'm gone." That's Dad. means to help your mother. That's what that means to be a leader. Do what mom says and to take the initiative. But I've talked with several pastors here. Talked to Pastor John Hill and Dr. Hine. Some of these things where dad are not involved in catechesis, it's not a very good situation at all.
May I interject?
Please.
Last week, there was a Concordia Catechetical Academy by Pastor Peter Bender, and their topic for this year was the first article of the Creed, and Pastor Rick Stuckwish presented on the fatherhood of God, and I can't remember quotes word for word very well, but one of his quotes was something to the effect of what the essence of fatherhood is to give your children Jesus. We should be defining fatherhood on the basis of what God is rather than God on the basis of what fatherhood is. And what does God our Father do? He gives us Jesus. And if we aren't doing that, then we aren't really true fathers. And of course, there's also pointed out that God even provides fathers for us when our biological fathers fail us. Sometimes perhaps even through females, a fatherly role. But I think that's very important, something we need to impress upon all of the fathers.
Right, and I tell you, one of the most difficult things, and in visiting with both men and women in our congregation, especially a number of women, getting dad involved. It almost takes a pastor or another man to get the man involved. Oftentimes, I've found many ladies, many mothers who would be glad to have dad participate in these things or to be a leader in these things. But her, however gentle, persuasive, only comes across as nagging. And so he needs to hear that. Some of the conversation we were having, well, men, pastors, need to be more assertive in this and training up the men and discussing with men their role in, I would say we could definitely encourage fathers to be more involved in the round the table time, and I would even put this as even more important or just as important, involved in the divine service. Okay? I was thinking, if the topic for me today was, how did your father teach you the Christian faith? Me personally. Okay? Now, without spilling out my entire family history, I would say this: we did not have what I just talked to you about. Family time around the table, growing up, around the Word of God. We did not have kind of echoing going on in our household. But even though those things were all missing, we went to church. We went to church. It is amazing about just if you can't do anything else, and to be in the Lord's house on the Lord's day, to hear the hymns of faith, to pray the liturgy, to hear the sermon. We simply cannot exclude that from catechesis, home or school. To be in the divine service where God promises His gifts and delivers them to us. So that's, to be honest, that and Dad sent me to a Lutheran school. Okay? For home educators, we're doing that at home. We're doing that at home. But to be involved in it. And I think the other than corresponding thing is that to be involved in and this is sad to say in our day, but a Lutheran church, a Lutheran congregation. And all that that means with a Lutheran congregation. I wasn't in on the conversation with Dr. Bruss, but I would say that for me as a father, Luther has said, and I believe it was in his small catechism where he talked about we can train up kids, and I'm paraphrasing, we can train up kids to earn a living. Or, he even implies we don't even really have to train them up. They'll figure it out. If they want to earn a living, they'll figure it out without a whole lot of training, a whole lot of specialized training. Yet we put so much emphasis on that, right? Good job. That's why you need education. And I think Luther's right about that. You need to teach someone how to earn money. Spend all these years how to earn money. But rather than fussing and fretting about that, giving them the Word of God. Giving them the Word of God. And so, anyway, some of you have some answers.
I have a question. I was baptized in that Baptist church when I was 15, and then I married my husband, and he was Lutheran, and that's how I came to that. But, to me, a really important idea that maybe came out of that, sitting in the Baptist church, was the idea of obedience. And, the idea that, obviously the Lord's worthy of my obedience. So anyway, but I think that's also part of how I ended up here, the idea that, it's not up to me to decide, what I want to do. And so when you're discussing this about, that you should train your children or whatever. So I did, over time, and I don't remember the first time I heard this, but I'm aware of it. It's the idea that, fathers are supposed to train their children up. And so, kind of in a simplistic, don't know where to start kind of thing, came up with the idea that, we'll all read the Bible together from cover to cover, because my son is in 5th grade, so now he's old enough, or 6th grade, or whatever. He's old enough that it's not beyond his, maturity to sit there and listen and participate in reading that. So like every night we do that together, as a family. So we're almost done. So I think this is a really great session you have here. It's very timely, because now that we've done that, it'd be a good time to start on this program with, as a family doing this. But I think it's also for dads. I mean, they don't see themselves, as needing to do something maybe unless they're told, like, this is something you need to do, you need to obey, you need to train your children as an act of obedience, as well. But I don't know if that's Lutheran theology or not.
Well,
but, that's just kind of a person who's struggling to understand it.
Well, we're missing, I don't have some time here to talk about some of the beautiful content of this catechesis, and maybe that's missing in this presentation, but since you brought this up, let me just address something. One of the things that I think is Luther's intent, and not only Luther's intent, but I believe beneficial for us, is the praying of the catechism. And you have to understand that there were catechisms available and written in the Lutheran or in the Roman Catholic Church. So the idea of catechism is not a new idea to Luther. But what was, Luther rearranged the parts of the catechism, okay? So that the way we have the catechism today, especially with the 10 Commandments, Creed, and the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, okay? Especially those 3 sections, Luther ordered in that way. And the reason Luther especially ordered the catechism in this way was his understanding of the Christian life. Okay? Which comes back to kind of what you're talking about. You're talking about obedience. And not only for Luther, but I believe the Scriptures that understanding of the Christian life is simply an understanding of walking through the Ten Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. There you have, in the Ten Commandments, a conviction of that this is God's perfect standard. And as I see myself meditate upon, of course, Luther had a kind of a system of prayer where you would meditate upon the Scriptures. And then, after meditating upon the Scriptures, view your own life in light of what the Scriptures are saying. And then pray from out of that was how he would encourage us to pray. So that as we meditate upon the Ten Commandments, and some of you have maybe seen the orders for confession and absolution that have been written that help us to understand our sinfulness in light of God's command. But then here in the Apostles' Creed comes the gospel. Because there in the Creed, in the three persons of the divine one Godhead, we see all that God has done for us. Right? We see the Father and the creating Father and the sustaining Father of heaven and earth in the first article. In the second article, especially in the Creed is more this way. But in the second article, we see the Son and what He's done for us, all what God does for us. That the whole atonement, justification, His laying down His life on my behalf. And then the Spirit. The Spirit who has called me by the gospel, enlightened me with His gifts, and sanctifies and keeps me even today in that faith. And then he goes on to talk about in this Christian church, He daily and richly forgives my sins. So that really and then from that we pray the Lord's Prayer, right? As a life of prayer. The Lord opens our lips when we pray. And I really think here, maybe a way to look at Lutheran catechesis, especially in light of the first three sections there of the Catechism, is to see maybe the Christian life maybe without so much of an emphasis on obedience, but rather an emphasis on confession and absolution, the living the baptized life. It would be an understanding of the Christian life in the sense that God's law condemns me, but God's grace has brought me back to life. And this gathering around the table then becomes that opportunity to view the life, the Christian life, the sinner's life, as one of the old Latin phrases goes, simul justus et peccator, which means simultaneously or at the same time, sinner and saint. That when we come together in the divine service, or when we gather around the table and consider God's Word, that there we crush the sinner and rejoice in the saint that has been given to us, the new man. That maybe is a little different perspective than I think than maybe just simply maybe what I would call more legalistic or law-driven way of looking at Lutheran catechesis. And I think the fathers, there is a don't get me wrong, the Scriptures are clear about a man as far as obedience goes, being responsible and having fathers do not exasperate your children, the Scriptures say. And when you read that, what's the implication? Fathers, do not exasperate your children. How does it go on?
But bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Right. Which means to not bring them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord is to exasperate. That's exasperation. To leave them frustrated. And the understanding of exasperation there is wandering aimlessly. That's exasperation. You ever been to a maze and can't find your way out? We just went to one the other day on a hot day. I said, this is exasperation. This is me wandering around aimlessly, and I don't know how to get out. Frustrating, to be lost. If you've ever been truly lost, then you understand the verb there then, to be exasperated, in the sense the Scripture's talking about being exasperated. But to have a way, the way, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. To have it, the whole word there for way is hodos, or road, path. Okay? It's a well-known path. It's the path of Christ. And so this path that is delivered to us and given to us is a path that is not exasperating.
Which must focus on forgiveness, though, too. And the way is forgiveness, and too many fathers focus on law and punishment and not on forgiveness enough.
Right.
And too many wives with their husbands.
Well, sure.
Focus on, which I was going to say, I'm glad you said not to look at it legalistically, because you think of Timothy, who learned the faith from his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois, and we as women have the freedom also to use the catechism.
Absolutely.
The scriptures are clear, men only are to be pastors, but women in the home can certainly use and enjoy the catechism too.
Yes, yes. I most certainly. I think that where a father is absent, a mother's, especially the call of motherhood, certainly calls you to step into that. I really think for the blessings, though, that come out of also having 1 minute left, the blessings that come out of having dad, and you understand, a man's nature is not to do what we're asking him to do. His sinful nature is not to do what we would ask him to do. It's not his nature. What God calls him to do, man rejects, and that is our sinful nature, right? To reject the role God has given to us. So to encourage him in that role is quite a blessing. But we have the number of mothers today that are involved in, mothers weren't stepping up and playing, we certainly would be in a whole heap of trouble in the church today. Mothers were not. So, all right, I thank you for coming, and blessings on your catechesis.
I was going to say, I don't know if you've ever tried to do it in, foreign language as well, but when we did the Ten Commandments, my son did it first in German and then in English, just for the practice, you might as well, you're learning them anyway, so why not do them in German too? So I don't know if that would be appropriate, after they know it real well. It'd be like, one thing for me in foreign language education was, I was like, watch a movie that you like, but like every single word. And then when you watch it in the foreign language, it's easier for you to process, because your foreign language feels a little weak, but you know what they should be saying, right? And you can pick up a lot of phrases that way and stuff. So it helps with the fluency in foreign language once you're fluent in the material, and then to do it in the foreign language. It's kind of a fun thing. And I mean, it's reinforcement.
Excellent idea.
Pastor Heine is calling us to.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
I heard you mention Stickwish, and do you read his blog?
No, I don't do a lot of that.
I gave you a message.
Write something like
Yeah,
that.
I think I was hoping you could do something with it.
I know.
I realized what I need to do.
I knew his
Well,
name.
my
Linda.
intention is to do that,
Catechism.
and a lot of them right where it is, and everybody's
Little one that
But I think
where
so.
is that worshiping
Because I really need,
angels in our
what I need to do is
to
put it into a readable.
understand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to find a,
Yeah.
from the publisher,
Well,
for this
thank
book,
you.
it's so critical. So, yeah, again, seeing you again reminds me to, I know right where that is, I just haven't, I think
It's
I'm gonna
okay,
announce a year
because
later,
it
so I'm
was-
sorry about that.
It was too, well, like I said, it needs to be put into a readable whole.